The blood on her dress told a story she couldn't remember, and when Lila Sutton stumbled into Pecos, Texas, on that scorching afternoon in July 1878, she carried nothing but questions that had no answers. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street as she walked barefoot past the saloon, the general store, and the weathered faces of townsfolk who stopped their conversations to stare. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, and her green eyes held a wildness that made people step back. The dress, once white, was torn at the hem and stained with dirt and something darker. She didn't know whose blood it was. She didn't know her own name until she saw it stitched into the inside collar when the doctor examined her later that day. Dr. Morrison was a kind man with silver hair and gentle hands, and he asked her questions she couldn't answer. Where had she come from? What had happened? Were those her injuries or someone else's blood? Lila stared at him with increasing panic, searching her mind for any fragment of memory, but there was nothing. It was as if she had simply appeared in the desert, fully formed, but empty of history. "I don't know," she whispered, and those three words would become her constant refrain in the days that followed. The sheriff, a portly man named Wilkins, tried to help. He sent telegrams to neighboring towns, asking about missing women, about incidents involving violence, about anyone who might know a dark-haired girl of about 20 years. The replies came back negative, one after another. Nobody knew her. Nobody was looking for her. Lila Sutton existed in the present moment only, with no past to anchor her. The town of Pecos was small, a cluster of buildings that served the surrounding ranches and the occasional traveler heading west. Water was scarce, money was scarcer, and everyone knew everyone else's business. Except now, they had a mystery in their midst, and the gossip spread like wildfire through dried grass. Martha Henderson, who owned the boarding house, took Lila in out of Christian charity and possibly curiosity. She gave her a room on the second floor with a window that overlooked the main street, and she provided simple meals in exchange for help with the housework. Lila was grateful, though gratitude felt strange when she couldn't remember if she'd ever had to be grateful before. The nightmares came every night, images without context, a man's angry face, the sound of gunshots, the smell of smoke, hands grabbing her arms. She would wake gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat, and she would sit by the window watching the stars until dawn crept over the horizon. The not knowing was worse than any truth could be, she thought. At least truth could be faced, understood, grieved if necessary. This emptiness was a special kind of torture. 3 weeks after her arrival, Harrison Vance rode into Pecos with a string of horses he'd brought up from Mexico. He was a tall man in his mid-20s with sun-bronzed skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were the color of good whiskey, and when he smiled, which wasn't often, it transformed his serious face into something warmer. He worked as a horse trader, an occasional ranch hand, moving between towns as work demanded, never staying long in one place. He'd heard about the mysterious woman while having a drink at the saloon in Fort Stockton, 50 miles east. The story had spread beyond Pecos, gaining embellishments with each retelling. Some said she was a bandit's widow. Others claimed she'd survived an Apache attack. A few whispered that she might have done something terrible herself, and the shock had stolen her memories. Harrison was intrigued despite himself. He'd seen enough of the world to know that people carried secrets, and he'd learned not to judge the weight of another person's burdens. He had his own past, his own reasons for drifting from place to place. So when he finished his business in Pecos, selling 6 horses to local ranchers, he found himself lingering instead of moving on to the next town. He first saw Lila on a Tuesday morning as she swept the front steps of the boarding house. She moved with an unconscious grace, her attention focused on her task, unaware of his gaze from across the street. There was something fragile about her, but also a strength in the set of her shoulders, as if she was holding herself together through sheer will. Martha Henderson noticed him watching, and being a woman who believed in divine providence and romantic possibilities, decided to take matters into her own hands. That evening, she invited Harrison to dinner at the boarding house, claiming she needed help fixing a loose board on the porch. It was a transparent excuse, but Harrison accepted anyway. Lila served the meal, her movements quiet and efficient. She barely looked at him, keeping her eyes downcast, and Harrison wondered if she was shy or simply trying to make herself invisible. When she set his plate down, he said, "Thank you, miss," and she glanced up briefly. Her eyes met his for just a moment, and he saw the sadness there, deep and endless like a well that had run dry. After dinner, while he actually did fix Martha's porch board, Lila came outside with a glass of lemonade. "Mrs. Henderson thought you might be thirsty," she said, holding it out. Harrison set down his hammer and took the glass, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "That's kind of you both." He drank deeply, then said, "I'm Harrison Vance." Lila Sutton. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if she wasn't entirely certain of the name. "You settling in Pecos?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. She looked away toward the western horizon where the sun was beginning its descent. "I don't know where else to go." There was something in the way she said it that made Harrison's chest tighten. He'd been drifting for 5 years, ever since his family's ranch in Kansas had been foreclosed, and he understood the feeling of having nowhere that felt like home. But at least he knew where he'd come from, even if he couldn't go back. "Town seems decent enough," he offered. "People are kind." "They are," Lila agreed, "but they look at me like I'm a puzzle they want to solve. I wish I could give them answers." Harrison set down the glass and met her eyes directly. "Maybe answers aren't as important as people think." She tilted her head, studying him with sudden interest. "How can you say that?" "I don't know who I am." "You know who you are right now," Harrison said. "You're someone who helps Mrs. Henderson. Someone who's strong enough to keep going even when you're scared." "That's not nothing." Lila's eyes filled with tears, and she blinked them back quickly. "I could be anyone. I could have done terrible things. That blood on my dress when I arrived, what if it was someone I hurt?" "Do you feel like someone who hurts people?" Harrison asked gently. She was quiet for a long moment, searching inside herself. "No," she finally said. "But how can I trust my own feelings when I can't trust my own memory?" Harrison picked up his hammer again, turning it over in his hands. "I knew a man once who lost his memory after getting kicked in the head by a horse. He was terrified of what he might have been before. Turned out he'd been a drunk who beat his wife. When she heard he didn't remember anything, she told him he'd been a good man, a kind husband. He believed her, and he became that person. Stayed that way even after his memories came back. He said forgetting had given him a chance to be better than he was." "What happened to him?" Lila asked. "Last I heard, he and his wife were running a successful stable in Colorado. Happy as anyone I'd ever seen." Lila smiled, a real smile that softened her features. "That's a nice story." "It's a true story," Harrison said. "Point is, maybe your past doesn't have to define you. Maybe you get to decide who you are starting from now." "The cowboy philosopher," Lila said, and there was a hint of teasing in her tone that made Harrison grin. "Just a man who's seen a few things." He finished hammering the board back into place and stood, brushing dust from his pants. "I should be heading out. Got a room at the hotel. Will you be staying in Pecos long?" The question came out quickly, as if she'd surprised herself by asking. Harrison looked at her, really looked at her, and made a decision that would change everything. "Longer than I planned." Over the following weeks, Harrison found reasons to stay in Pecos. He took a job helping at the livery stable, breaking and training horses for the owner, Samuel Garrett. The work was good, the pay fair, and it gave him a reason to remain in town without seeming strange. But everyone knew, including Harrison himself, that the real reason was Lila. He began taking his evening meals at the boarding house, and after dinner, he and Lila would sit on the porch and talk as the heat of the day faded into cooler night air. She told him about her nightmares, the fragments of images that made no sense. He told her about his family's ranch, about his father's pride that had prevented him from accepting help when the drought came, about watching everything they'd built get sold to pay debts. "Do you regret leaving?" Lila asked one night. watching moths flutter around the lantern hanging by the door. I didn't leave, Harrison said. I was already gone. My father sent me to work on a ranch in Colorado the year before, trying to earn extra money. By the time I came back, they'd already lost everything. My parents moved in with my mother's sister in Missouri. There wasn't room for me, and anyway, I was old enough to make my own way. Do you see them? Not in 3 years. He said it matter-of-factly, but Lila heard the pain underneath. I wonder if I have family somewhere, she said quietly. If there are people who miss me, who wonder where I went. Harrison reached over and took her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. If you did, they'd have come looking by now. Sheriff Wilkins sent word far and wide. Maybe they can't come. Maybe something happened to them. Her voice caught. Maybe that's why I was alone in the desert. Maybe, Harrison acknowledged. But torturing yourself with maybes won't help. You're here now, that's what matters. Lila turned to look at him, her face illuminated by the soft lamplight. You said something like that the first night we talked, about now being more important than before. I meant it. Harrison squeezed her hand gently. I've spent too much of my life looking backward, wishing things had gone differently. It doesn't change anything. The only direction that matters is forward. Forward into what? Lila asked. I have no plans, no prospects. I'm living on Mrs. Henderson's charity, and while she's kind, I can't impose on her forever. So make new plans, Harrison said. What do you want to do? Lila was quiet, considering. I don't know. That's the problem. I don't know what skills I have, what I'm capable of. I can cook and clean, apparently, but so can most women. I don't know if I can read or write beyond the basics. I don't know anything. You have time to figure it out, Harrison said. And you're not alone. I'll help you. She looked at him with such vulnerable hope that it made his heart ache. Why? Why would you help me when you don't even know me? Because I want to, Harrison said simply. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing, worth helping, because maybe we're both looking for something and maybe we can find it together. Lila's eyes searched his face, looking for deception or pity, but she found only sincerity. Slowly she smiled. You're a good man, Harrison Vance. I'm just a man, he said, but I'm trying to be a good one. As summer deepened into August, their friendship grew into something more. Harrison taught Lila to ride, borrowing a gentle mare from the livery. She was nervous at first, sitting stiffly in the saddle, but Harrison was patient, walking beside her, his hand steady on the horse's bridle. Relax, he said. She can feel your tension. Trust her. I'm trying, Lila said, gripping the saddle horn with white knuckles. Here. Harrison reached up and gently loosened her fingers. Hold the reins like this. Light but firm. You're guiding her, not controlling her. There's a difference. Lila adjusted her grip, and the mare's ears flicked back, listening. When Lila pressed her heels gently against the horse's sides, the mare began to walk, and Harrison stepped back, letting them go. I'm doing it, Lila called, her face lighting up with delight. Harrison watched her circle the corral, her body gradually relaxing into the horse's rhythm, and he felt something shift inside his chest. It wasn't just attraction, though he couldn't deny that her smile made his pulse quicken. It was deeper than that, a recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit. They were both unmoored from their pasts, both trying to find solid ground in an uncertain present. After the riding lesson, they walked back toward town, leading the mare between them. Lila's face was flushed from exertion and pleasure, and she kept talking about the feeling of movement, of freedom, of doing something she might never have done before. Maybe I was a rider before, she said excitedly. Maybe I had horses. Maybe, Harrison agreed, but he thought it unlikely. She'd sat in the saddle like someone who'd never ridden, all fear and stiffness. But he didn't say that. He let her have her hope. They were passing by the general store when a woman emerged, a basket of groceries on her arm. She took one look at Lila, and her face went pale. The basket slipped from her hands, and eggs cracked on the wooden sidewalk. You, the woman whispered, staring at Lila with wide eyes. You're alive. Lila froze, her hand tightening on the mare's reins. Do you know me? The woman shook her head quickly, as if waking from a trance. No, I'm sorry. You just look like someone I once knew. Someone who died years ago. I apologize for startling you. She bent quickly to gather her groceries, refusing Harrison's offer of help, and hurried away down the street. Harrison watched her go, frowning. That was strange, Lila said. Her earlier joy completely evaporated. Did you see how she looked at me? Like she'd seen a ghost, Harrison agreed. But she said you just resembled someone. That happens sometimes. People have doubles. Or she was lying, Lila said quietly. Maybe she does know me. Maybe she knows something terrible. Harrison tied the mare to the hitching post and turned to face Lila, taking both her hands in his. Do you want me to go after her? Ask her directly? Lila's breath came quick and shallow, and he could see the war in her eyes between desperate need to know and paralyzing fear. Finally, she shook her head. No, if she wanted to tell me something, she would have. Maybe it's better not to know. You don't believe that, Harrison said gently. No, Lila admitted, but I'm afraid. What if learning the truth is worse than not knowing? Then we'll face it together, Harrison said. Whatever it is, you won't face it alone. I promise you that. Lila looked up at him, and in that moment, standing on the dusty street with the afternoon sun beating down, Harrison realized he was falling in love with her. It should have frightened him. He'd always kept himself emotionally distant, never staying anywhere long enough to form real attachments, but instead, it felt right, natural, like something he'd been moving toward his entire life without knowing it. Why are you so good to me? Lila asked, echoing her earlier question, but with a different tone now. Something softer and more wondering. Because I care about you, Harrison said. More than I probably should, given that we've only known each other a few weeks. Is that possible, to care so much so quickly? I don't know what's possible, Harrison said, but I know what I feel. Lila stepped closer to him, closing the distance between them. I feel it too. I don't know if I've ever felt this way before. I don't have anything to compare it to. But when I'm with you, the emptiness doesn't hurt as much. You make me feel real. Harrison cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. You are real. Your past doesn't change that. Kiss me, Lila whispered. Please. Harrison leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. Gentle at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms coming up around his neck. The world fell away, the heat, the dust, the curious stares of passers-by, and there was only this moment, this connection, this feeling of rightness. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Lila rested her forehead against his chest. I don't want to be afraid anymore. Then don't be, Harrison said, holding her close. Whatever comes, we'll handle it. Together. But the encounter with the strange woman had opened a door that couldn't easily be closed. That night, Lila's nightmares intensified. She dreamed of a house burning, of running through the desert, of a man's voice shouting her name, not Lila, but something else, a name she couldn't quite hear. She woke sobbing, and Martha Henderson found her sitting on the floor of her room, rocking back and forth. Child, what's wrong? Martha knelt beside her, wrapping a shawl around Lila's shoulders. I remembered something, Lila gasped. Or I think I did. There was fire, and someone was shouting, and I was so scared, so terribly scared. Hush now, Martha soothed. It was just a dream. No, it felt like more than that. It felt like memory. Lila looked up at Martha with desperate eyes. What if something terrible happened? What if I did something terrible? Martha helped her back to bed, sitting beside her and stroking her hair like a child. Listen to me, Lila Sutton. I've been running this boarding house for 15 years, and I've met all kinds of people. Good, bad, and everything in between. I know character when I see it. Whatever happened to you before you came here, I know in my bones that you're a good person. Whatever you're afraid of, it's not that you're bad. You hear me? Lila nodded, wanting desperately to believe it. That young man, Harrison, Martha continued. He sees it too. The way he looks at you, that's a man who sees something worth cherishing. Trust his judgment if you can't trust your own. I love him, Lila whispered, admitting it aloud for the first time. Is that foolish? To love someone when I don't even know who I am? Love is never foolish, Martha said firmly. It's the one thing that makes sense in a senseless world. You hold on to that love, child. It'll see you through whatever darkness comes. The next morning, Harrison arrived at the boarding house earlier than usual. His face was serious, and he asked to speak with Lila privately. They walked to the edge of town, to a small grove of cottonwood trees where a thin stream trickled. I found the woman from yesterday, Harrison said without preamble. Her name is Catherine Wells. She and her husband own a ranch about 10 miles north of here. Lila's heart began to pound. What did she say? She admitted she lied. She does think she knows you or knew you. Harrison took Lila's hand. She said there was a family lived near her ranch about 7 or 8 years ago, a family named Salazar. Mexican family, parents, and a daughter about your age. One night their house caught fire. Everyone thought the whole family died. Salazar, Lila repeated, testing the name. It felt foreign on her tongue, but also somehow familiar. But that doesn't make sense. I'm not Mexican. I don't speak Spanish. Catherine said the daughter had light skin, green eyes like yours. The father was Mexican, but the mother was white, American. The daughter favored her mother. Lila sat down heavily on a fallen log, her mind reeling. If they all died in the fire, how could I be the daughter? Catherine said they never found the daughter's body. They assumed she'd burned completely, or animals had taken the remains. It was a terrible fire, very hot. But what if she survived? What if you survived? Then where have I been for 8 years? Lila asked. Why can't I remember? I don't know, Harrison admitted. But it's a lead. Something real to investigate. Do you want to talk to Catherine? Maybe visit the site where the house was? Lila looked up at him, this man who had become her anchor in the storm. Would you come with me? I wouldn't let you go alone, Harrison said. They rode out the next day, Harrison on his bay gelding and Lila on the borrowed mare, with Catherine Wells leading the way on a sturdy paint. The August heat was brutal, and they stopped frequently to water the horses and drink from their canteens. Catherine was a taciturn woman in her 40s, weathered by the harsh Texas sun, and she didn't say much as they rode. The ruins of the house were still visible, though 8 years of wind and weather had reduced them to little more than blackened timber and crumbled adobe. Catherine stayed with the horses while Harrison and Lila picked their way through the debris. I don't feel anything, Lila said, disappointed. I thought if I saw it, something would come back. Harrison squeezed her shoulder. Memory doesn't work on demand. But we're here. Take your time. Lila walked slowly around the perimeter of the ruins, trying to imagine the house as it had been. A home, a family living and laughing and going about their daily lives, not knowing that fire would take everything. She closed her eyes, reaching for any fragment of recognition. And then she heard it, a scrap of melody, wordless and haunting, echoing in her mind. Without thinking, she began to hum it. Catherine, who had been standing by the horses, went rigid. She hurried over, her face pale. Where did you learn that song? Lila stopped humming, startled. I don't know, it just came to me. That's the song Maria used to sing, Catherine said, her voice shaking. Maria Salazar, the mother. She sang it every evening while she cooked dinner. We could hear it sometimes when the wind was right. She stared at Lila. You're her. You're Lucia Salazar. I'd stake my life on it. The name struck Lila like a physical blow. Lucia. It resonated in a way Lila never had, vibrating through her like a struck bell. Lucia, she whispered. Lucia Salazar. Memories began to surface, fragmented and chaotic. A woman's face, her mother's face smiling as she stirred a pot. Her father's deep laugh, the smell of her mother's cooking, herbs and spices she couldn't name. And then darkness, smoke, terror. Running through the desert, her feet bleeding, her lungs burning. Lila, no. Lucia dropped to her knees. Overwhelmed. Harrison was beside her immediately, holding her as she trembled. What happened to them? She asked Catherine through tears. How did the fire start? Catherine's face was grim. Some said it was an accident, a lamp knocked over, but there were rumors. Your father had a dispute with a rancher named Garrett. Not Samuel Garrett from the livery, his older brother Thomas. Thomas wanted to buy your father's land, and your father refused. Thomas had a reputation for getting what he wanted, no matter what it took. Harrison's jaw tightened. You think he set the fire? I don't know, Catherine said. There was no proof. Thomas died 5 years ago, fell from his horse and broke his neck. If he did it, he took the truth to his grave. And what about after? Lucia asked. If I survived, where did I go? Why can't I remember anything past a few weeks ago? Catherine shook her head. That I can't answer. But if you survived the fire at 12 years old, traumatized, and alone in the desert, who knows where you ended up or what happened to you? The mind can do strange things to protect itself from horrors it can't process. They rode back to Pecos in heavy silence. Lucia's mind was a maelstrom of partial memories and unanswered questions. She had a name now, a past, but it only raised more mysteries. Where had she been for 8 years? What had she done? How had she ended up walking into Pecos with blood on her dress? That evening, she sat with Harrison on the boarding house porch, watching the sun set in streaks of orange and red. I don't know if this is better or worse, she said quietly. Having a piece of the puzzle, but not all of it. It's a beginning, Harrison said. You know you had parents who loved you. You know you survived something terrible. That takes strength, Lucia. She tested the name again, letting it settle into place. I think I like Lila better. Lucia feels like someone else, someone who died in that fire. Lila is who I am now. Harrison nodded, understanding. Then you're Lila. The past doesn't own you. But it does, Lila said, frustration creeping into her voice. There are still 8 years missing. What if I did terrible things in that time? What if the blood on my dress when I arrived was someone I hurt or killed? Do you want to keep searching? Harrison asked. We could keep asking questions, send more telegrams, visit other towns. Lila was quiet for a long time, wrestling with the decision. Finally, she said, No, I think Catherine was right. My mind blocked out those years for a reason. Maybe I'm not ready to know. Maybe I'll never be ready. But I can't spend my whole life chasing ghosts. She turned to look at him, her eyes clear and determined. You said something to me when we first met. You said origin matters less than now. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. You were right. Harrison took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. So what do you want to do? With your now? Lila looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, this man who had given her hope when she had none. I want to build a life, here in Pecos, with you if you'll have me. Harrison's answering smile was like sunrise after the darkest night. There's nothing I want more. Even though I'm broken? Lila asked. Even though I'll probably never remember everything? You're not broken, Harrison said fiercely. You're surviving, you're strong, and I love you. And I love Lila. I love you exactly as you are, with or without your memories. Lila felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were good tears, cleansing tears. I love you too. So much it terrifies me. Harrison cupped her face and kissed her, deep and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Then let's be terrified together. Let's build something good out of all this uncertainty. How? Lila asked. I have nothing. No property, no money, no family. You have me, Harrison said, and I have some money saved. Not much, but enough to start. I've been thinking about settling down, buying some land, raising horses properly instead of just trading them. Would you want that? A ranch of our own? The idea filled Lila with sudden fierce longing. A home, a place that belonged to them, where she could plant roots and grow into the person she wanted to be. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I want that more than anything. Then that's what we'll do, Harrison said decisively. I'll talk to Samuel tomorrow about any land for sale nearby. We'll get married, proper and legal, and we'll build a life that's ours. No past, just future. Origin matters less than now, Lila repeated, understanding the full weight of those words finally. You were teaching me that from the beginning, weren't you? I was teaching us both, Harrison said. I've been running from my past for too long. Time to stop running and start living. They sat together on that porch until the stars came out, making plans and dreaming dreams, two wounded people finding healing in each other. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church at the edge of Pecos. Martha Henderson cried happy tears and declared it the most romantic thing she'd ever witnessed. Sheriff Wilkins gave Lila away, having appointed himself a sort of unofficial guardian since her arrival. Samuel Garrett stood up as Harrison's best man, and Catherine Wells came with her husband, bringing a beautiful quilt as a wedding gift. Lila wore a simple cream-colored dress that Martha had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Harrison had picked that morning from the hills outside town. As she walked down the short aisle toward where Harrison stood waiting, tall and handsome in his best clothes, she felt something settle inside her. Peace, perhaps, or purpose. Whatever shadows lurked in her lost years, this moment was bright and clear and wholly hers. The Reverend spoke of love and commitment, of choosing to walk forward together through whatever trials might come. When it was time for the vows, Harrison took Lila's hands and spoke with simple sincerity. I promise to be your home when you feel lost, your strength when you feel weak, and your companion through all the days of our lives. Your past doesn't scare me, and your future is mine. I love you, Lila Vance. Lila had to swallow hard against the tears before she could speak. I promise to build a life with you that's worth all the years I lost. I promise to choose forward instead of backward, to love you with everything I am and everything I'm becoming. You gave me hope when I had none, and I'll spend my life proving worthy of that gift. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Harrison kissed her, the small congregation applauded. It wasn't grand or elaborate, but it was real, and it was theirs. Samuel had found them a piece of land about 5 miles west of Pecos, near a reliable creek that ran year-round. It wasn't large, maybe 60 acres, but the price was reasonable, and the land was good for horses. The house was small, just 3 rooms, but it was sturdy and had a good roof. They moved in a week after the wedding, their few possessions loaded into a wagon borrowed from the livery. Their first night in their own home, they lay together in the bed Harrison had built, listening to the creek babbling outside and the coyotes calling in the distance. Lila traced patterns on Harrison's chest with her finger, marveling at the reality of it all. Are you happy? Harrison asked, his voice drowsy. Happier than I have any right to be, Lila said. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and this will all be a dream. It's real, Harrison assured her, pulling her closer. We're real. This life is real. Tell me about the horses we'll raise, Lila said. Tell me what our life will look like. Harrison smiled in the darkness and began to paint pictures with words. They'd start with 5 or 6 good mares and a strong stallion. They'd breed horses known for endurance and intelligence, the kind that ranchers and travelers needed in this harsh land. Lila could help with the training. She'd proven to have a natural touch with animals. In a few years, they'd have a reputation, and people would come from far and wide for Vance horses. And maybe, Harrison added softly, in a year or two, there might be children running around. Lila's breath caught. Children? If you want them, Harrison said. I know you're still finding yourself, still healing. I'm not pushing. No, Lila said quickly. I want that. I want children with you. A family. I want to fill this house with love and noise and life. I want to create something good, something that can't be taken away. Harrison kissed the top of her head. Then that's what we'll do. The first year of their marriage was hard work, but deeply satisfying. They rose before dawn and worked until after sunset, building fences, clearing brush, making repairs to the house and barn. Harrison taught Lila everything he knew about horses, and she absorbed it all with fierce concentration. She had an intuitive understanding of the animals, could calm a skittish horse with just her voice and gentle hands. They bought their first string of horses in October, 5 mares and a stallion named Thunder, who had the best bloodlines Harrison could afford. Lila fell in love with a gentle bay mare they named Sunrise, and she spent hours working with her, teaching her to respond to the lightest touch. The nightmares still came sometimes, but less frequently. When Lila woke gasping in the dark, Harrison was there to hold her, to remind her that she was safe, that whatever haunted her dreams couldn't hurt her anymore. Gradually, the periods of peace between nightmares grew longer, and the nightmares themselves lost some of their sharp terror. They made trips into Pecos twice a month for supplies and to maintain connections with the community. Martha always insisted they stay for dinner, and she was not so subtly watching for signs that Lila might be expecting. Sheriff Wilkins would update them on town gossip, and Samuel would discuss the horse market with Harrison. During one of these visits, in early spring of their second year of marriage, a stranger rode into town asking questions. He was a hard-looking man with cold eyes, and he showed people a drawing of a woman asking if anyone had seen her. The description was vague enough: dark hair, green eyes, about 20 years old, but something about it made Sheriff Wilkins uncomfortable. He came out to the ranch the next day to talk to Harrison and Lila. Might be nothing, he said, accepting a cup of coffee. But this fellow was asking about a woman who matches your description, Lila. Said she was wanted for questioning in a shooting down in Fort Davis 2 years back. Lila's face went white. Fort Davis? I don't remember ever being there. Did he have a name? Harrison asked, his voice tight. Said he was looking for a woman called Lucy Martinez. But he also mentioned she might be using a different name, that she'd had a head injury and might not remember who she was. That could be a coincidence, Harrison said, but he didn't sound convinced. Could be, Sheriff Wilkins agreed. But I thought you should know. I told him I hadn't seen anyone matching that description, sent him toward El Paso. But if he's determined, he might come back this way eventually. After the sheriff left, Lila paced the small kitchen, her hands shaking. What if it's true? What if I shot someone? You don't know that you did, Harrison said firmly. This man could be lying, looking for someone else entirely. Or even if there was a shooting, you might have been the victim, not the perpetrator. A head injury would explain the memory loss. Or I could be a murderer, Lila said, her voice breaking. Oh God, Harrison, what if everything we've built is a lie? Harrison stood and caught her in his arms, forcing her to be still. Listen to me. Whatever happened before, whoever you might have been, you're not that person now. You're Lila Vance. You're my wife. You're a woman who works hard, who treats everyone with kindness, who's building something good and honest. That's the truth, not some maybe that happened years ago. But if he comes back, Lila said, if he has proof, then we'll deal with it, Harrison said. Together. I'm not going to let anyone take you away from me, do you understand? I'll fight heaven and hell if I have to. Lila buried her face in his chest, holding on to him like a lifeline. I'm so scared. I know, Harrison said, stroking her hair. But we'll get through this. We've gotten through everything else. The stranger didn't come back, and as weeks turned into months, without any further incidents, they began to relax again. Lila threw herself into work with renewed determination, as if by proving her worth in the present she could somehow erase whatever sins might lurk in her forgotten past. Their ranch was thriving. The first foals were born that spring, strong and healthy, and buyers were already expressing interest. Harrison's reputation as an honest dealer and skilled horseman was spreading, and people came from surrounding counties to do business with them. In late summer, Lila began to feel unwell in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she'd eaten, but when it persisted for 2 weeks, Martha Henderson took one look at her during a visit to town and declared with absolute certainty that she was expecting a baby. Lila was stunned. She'd wanted children, had dreamed of them, but the reality of it now felt overwhelming. What kind of mother could she be when she didn't even know her own story? Harrison, when she told him that evening, lifted her off her feet and spun her around, his face alight with pure joy. A baby! We're going to have a baby! His happiness was infectious, and Lila found herself laughing through tears. Are you ready for this? I've been ready since the day I met you, Harrison said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. This is everything I wanted, everything we've been building toward. I'm terrified, Lila admitted. What if I'm a terrible mother? What if something is wrong with me, something broken that will hurt our child? Harrison tilted her chin up, making her meet his eyes. You are going to be an amazing mother. You're strong and kind and loving. Our child is blessed to have you. How can you be so sure? Lila asked. Because I know you, Harrison said simply. Not the you from 8 years ago or 10 years ago. I know the you that exists right now, and that's the person who's going to raise our child. That's the person I married. That's the person I love. As the months passed and Lila's belly grew round with their child, she found a peace she'd never thought possible. The nightmares stopped almost entirely. It was as if the baby growing inside her was pushing out the darkness, filling the empty spaces with light and hope. She and Harrison spent evenings planning for the baby's arrival. They converted the small third room into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow. Martha organized a quilting bee, and women from Pecos and the surrounding ranches came together to make blankets and baby clothes. Catherine Wells brought a hand-carved cradle that had belonged to her own children. Dr. Morrison came out to check on Lila regularly, pronouncing her and the baby healthy. Should be born sometime in late February, he estimated. You're strong as a horse, Mrs. Vance. You'll do just fine. The baby arrived on February 23rd, 1880, during a cold snap that had everyone huddling near their fires. Harrison paced outside, while Martha and Dr. Morrison attended to Lila inside. The labor was long and difficult, and Harrison aged years in those hours, listening to Lila's cries and feeling utterly helpless. But finally, as dawn broke over the horizon, he heard a new sound, the outraged wail of a newborn baby. Martha opened the door, her face tired but triumphant. You have a son, and your wife is asking for you. Harrison stumbled into the bedroom to find Lila propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in one of the quilts from the bee. She looked up at him with such love that his chest felt too small to contain his heart. Come meet your son, she said softly. Harrison approached as if walking on sacred ground. He looked down at the tiny red face, the miniature fingers curled into fists, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This was his son, his family, his legacy. He's perfect, Harrison whispered. He has your eyes, Lila said. Look, when he opens them, that same color. They named him Henry after Harrison's father, Henry Robert Vance, born into a world of hope and possibility, unaware of the complicated histories of his parents, and blissfully innocent of everything except warmth and milk and love. The months after Henry's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry, but also profound joy. Harrison discovered reserves of patience he'd never known he possessed, walking the floor at 2 in the morning with a crying baby so Lila could sleep. Lila marveled at the fierce protective love she felt, how she would do anything, face anything, to keep her son safe. Henry was a healthy baby who grew quickly, his initial red wrinkledness transforming into chubby cheeks and bright eyes that did indeed match his father's whiskey brown. He smiled early, and his laugh was the most beautiful sound either of his parents had ever heard. When Henry was 6 months old, the stranger came back. Harrison was in the barn working with a yearling when he heard the sound of hooves approaching. He stepped out to see a man on a dusty gray horse riding up to the house. It was the same hard-faced man Sheriff Wilkins had described, and Harrison's blood ran cold. "Help you with something?" Harrison called, walking toward the house, positioning himself between the stranger and the door where Lila was inside with Henry. The man dismounted and pulled out the drawing again. "I'm looking for this woman. Name might be Lucy Martinez. I have reason to believe she's in this area." "Haven't seen anyone like that," Harrison said evenly. The man's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that? Sheriff in town seemed mighty eager to send me on my way. Makes a man wonder what he's protecting." "The sheriff keeps the peace," Harrison said. "If he sent you away, probably had good reason." "I'm a bounty hunter," the man said. "Name's Pike. This woman is wanted for shooting a man in Fort Davis. There's money for information leading to her capture." "Then I hope you find her," Harrison said, "but she's not here." Pike's gaze traveled past Harrison to the house, where Lila had appeared in the doorway, Henry on her hip. Even from a distance, Harrison could see the recognition in Pike's eyes. "That her?" Pike said, his hand moving toward his gun. Harrison's hand was faster. He had his revolver drawn and pointed at Pike before the bounty hunter could clear leather. "Don't," Harrison said, his voice deadly calm. "Just don't." Pike froze, reassessing. "So it is her." "That's my wife," Harrison said. "Mother of my child. And she's not going anywhere with you." "There's a warrant," Pike said. "I've got the legal right." "Show me the warrant," Harrison demanded. Pike slowly reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Harrison took it with his left hand, keeping his gun trained with his right. He scanned the document quickly. It was official-looking, issued by a judge in Fort Davis for the arrest of one Lucy Martinez in connection with the shooting death of a man named James Garrett. Garrett, the name from Lila's past. Thomas Garrett had been the man suspected of burning down her family's home. James must have been a relative. "This is 2 years old," Harrison said, "and the woman's name is Lucy Martinez, not Lila Vance." "Come on," Pike said. "You know it's her. Dark hair, green eyes, the right age, and look at her face. She knows exactly why I'm here." Harrison glanced back at Lila, who was indeed pale as death, clutching Henry tightly. "Lila, take the baby inside." "Harrison!" She started. "Inside. Now." She disappeared into the house, and Harrison turned back to Pike. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back on your horse and ride out of here. You're going to forget you ever saw this place." Pike laughed, a harsh sound. "Or what? You'll shoot me? That'll just bring more law down on you and her both." "Maybe," Harrison said. "But you'll still be dead. And I can live with that if it keeps my family safe." Pike studied Harrison for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if he was bluffing. Whatever he saw in Harrison's face must have convinced him, because he raised his hands slowly. "All right, take it easy, I'm going." He mounted his horse, but before riding off, he said, "This isn't over. That reward is substantial. Someone else will come eventually, especially if I spread the word about where she is." "Then we'll deal with them too," Harrison said. "But Pike, if you come back here, I won't warn you twice. I'll shoot first and bury the questions with your body." You understand? Pike nodded once and rode away. Harrison stood watching until he was out of sight, then hurried into the house. He found Lila sitting on the floor, rocking Henry and crying. It's true, isn't it? I killed someone. James Garrett. He must have been related to Thomas, the man who burned down my family's home. Harrison knelt beside her, putting his arms around both her and the baby. You don't know what happened. That warrant says shooting, not murder. It could have been self-defense. But I don't remember, Lila sobbed. How can I defend myself against charges when I don't remember what I did? We'll figure it out, Harrison said. First thing, I'm riding into town to talk to Sheriff Wilkins. We need to know more about this warrant, about what really happened. There has to be more to the story. What if they take me away? Lila asked, looking up at him with terrified eyes. What if they hang me? What happens to Henry? What happens to you? That's not going to happen, Harrison said fiercely. I won't let it. We'll fight this, Lila. We'll find the truth. Sheriff Wilkins, when Harrison brought him the warrant, studied it carefully and then shook his head. This is suspicious. First, the judge who signed it died a year ago. Second, I can send a telegram to Fort Davis and verify, but I'm betting if I do, they won't know anything about this warrant. You think it's fake? Harrison asked. I think someone wants your wife bad enough to forge legal documents, Wilkins said. Question is, why? If she really did shoot James Garrett, why not go through proper channels? Catherine Wells said Thomas Garrett tried to steal my wife's family's land before the fire that killed them, Harrison said. Maybe James was the same. Maybe he tried to harm Lila, and she defended herself, and now the family wants revenge. Could be, Wilkins agreed. Or could be something else entirely. But I'll make some inquiries. In the meantime, you watch your back. If Pike is working for the Garrett family, he's not going to give up easy. Harrison rode back to the ranch with his mind churning. He found Lila in the nursery, watching Henry sleep in his cradle, her face still pale and frightened. Sheriff thinks the warrant might be fake, Harrison said. He's going to investigate. But even if it's fake, Pike knows where we are now, Lila said. He knows I'm here. What if he comes back with others? What if they hurt you or Henry trying to get to me? Harrison took her hands. Then we'll fight. But Lila, I think it's time we went to Fort Davis ourselves. Found out exactly what happened 2 years ago. You need to know the truth, and we need evidence to fight back against whoever is doing this. Fear flashed across Lila's face, but beneath it, Harrison saw determination growing. You're right. I can't run from this forever. And I can't let our son grow up under this shadow. It'll be dangerous, Harrison warned. We don't know what we'll find. I know, Lila said, but I have to try. We have to try. They left Henry with Martha Henderson, who promised to guard the baby with her life. The ride to Fort Davis took 3 days, and every mile felt heavy with dread and anticipation. Lila was quiet most of the journey, lost in thought, occasionally reaching for Harrison's hand as they rode side by side. Fort Davis was larger than Pecos, a military town with Fort Davis itself still active, though less so than during the Indian Wars. They found a hotel and paid for a room, then set about asking questions. The name Garrett was well known. The family had been prominent ranchers, but their reputation was mixed. Some spoke of them with respect, others with thinly veiled dislike. James Garrett, they learned, had died 2 years ago of a gunshot wound. The official story was that he'd been killed by bandits while traveling alone. But an old Mexican woman who ran a small cantina told them a different story when they asked carefully worded questions. James Garrett was a bad man, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. He liked to hurt women, especially Mexican women and girls. Everyone knew, but the law did nothing because the Garretts had money and influence. What happened to him? Harrison asked. The woman shrugged. Someone finally shot him. There was a girl involved, I heard. A young woman he'd taken against her will. She fought back, but the Garretts put out that story about bandits to save face. If they'd admitted what James was doing, it would have destroyed their reputation. Do you know what happened to the girl? Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Disappeared, the woman said. Some said she died of injuries. Others said she ran away. The Garretts wanted her found, but not for justice. For revenge. They couldn't let it stand that a woman had killed one of their own, even if he deserved it. After leaving the cantina, Lila was shaking so hard she could barely walk. Harrison guided her to a quiet spot behind the hotel, where she collapsed against the wall. It was me, she said. I killed him. I must have. That's why I was in the desert, injured and covered in blood. I shot him and ran, and the trauma of it all made me forget. He was attacking you, Harrison said firmly. You defended yourself. That's not murder, Lila. That's survival. But the Garretts don't see it that way, Lila said. They'll never stop looking for me. They'll keep sending people like Pike until someone succeeds in taking me back here to hang. Then we need proof, Harrison said. Evidence that James Garrett was a predator, that you acted in self-defense. We need to make this public so the Garretts can't hide behind their lies. They spent the next 2 days carefully gathering information and testimony. The Mexican woman from the cantina introduced them to others who had suffered at James Garrett's hands or knew someone who had. Slowly, a picture emerged of a man who had terrorized vulnerable women for years with impunity. They found a lawyer, a young idealistic man named David Chen, who had recently arrived from California and didn't owe the Garrett family anything. He listened to their story and agreed to help. If we can get these testimonies on record and bring them before a judge, we can destroy any warrant the Garretts might try to enforce, Chen said, and we can make sure they don't hurt anyone else. The process took weeks. Lila and Harrison stayed in Fort Davis, sending word back to Pecos that they'd been delayed. Martha replied that Henry was fine and thriving, which eased some of Lila's heartache at being separated from her son. Finally, Chen arranged a hearing before Judge Anderson, a stern but fair man who had no love for the Garrett family. The courtroom was packed with people who had come to tell their stories, to finally speak truth to power. The Garrett family's lawyer tried to block the proceedings, but Judge Anderson overruled him. For 3 days, testimony was given. Women spoke of assault and rape. Families spoke of being driven from their land. A pattern of corruption and violence emerged that even the Garrett's considerable influence couldn't suppress. On the 4th day, Lila took the stand. With Harrison sitting in the front row for support, she told what she remembered. Being Lucia Salazar, the sole survivor of a fire that killed her family. Living rough after that, doing odd jobs, eventually ending up in Fort Davis, working as a maid in a hotel. James Garrett came to the hotel regularly, she said, her voice steady. He noticed me, started making comments, following me. One night, he waited until I was alone cleaning a room. He forced his way in. He tore my dress. He said no one would believe me if I told, that I was just a Mexican girl and he was a Garrett. But I had a small knife I used for work. When he wouldn't stop, when he wouldn't let me go, I stabbed him. And then I ran. I ran into the desert, and I just kept running until I couldn't remember why I was running anymore. The courtroom was silent when she finished. Judge Anderson looked at her with something like sympathy. And the gunshot wound that killed him? Lila frowned. I stabbed him. I didn't have a gun. The judge looked at his papers. The death certificate says gunshot wound to the chest. Chin stood up quickly. Your Honor, I'd like to request the exhumation of James Garrett's body to verify the actual cause of death. The Garrett lawyer objected strenuously, but Judge Anderson granted the request. 2 days later, the truth came out. James Garrett had died from a stab wound to the abdomen, not a gunshot. The gunshot wound had been added post-mortem to support the bandit story. Someone in your family shot a corpse to hide the truth, Judge Anderson said to the Garrett's lawyer. That's tampering with evidence and filing false reports. The warrant for Lucy Martinez, also known as Lucia Salazar, also known as Lila Vance, is hereby vacated. She acted in clear self-defense against a known predator. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full investigation into the Garrett family's business practices and treatment of their workers. The gavel came down, and it was over. Lila sagged with relief, and Harrison was there immediately, holding her up. Outside the courthouse, people approached Lila to thank her for her courage, to tell her she'd given them courage too. For the first time since she'd walked into Pecos with blood on her dress, Lila felt truly free. They rode back to Pecos lighter than they'd left, despite the exhaustion of the ordeal. When they arrived at the boarding house and Martha brought out Henry, now crawling and babbling, Lila broke down crying, holding her son close and promising never to leave him again. "It's over," she told Harrison that night as they settled back into their own bed in their own home. "It's really over. I know who I am now, all of it, and I can live with it." "You're a survivor," Harrison said, pulling her close. "You always have been." "I'm more than that now," Lila said. "I'm a wife, a mother, a rancher. I'm building something good, something that matters. The past doesn't own me anymore." "Origin matters less than now," Harrison said, echoing the words he'd first spoken to her over 2 years ago. "Origin matters less than now," Lila repeated, and this time she believed it completely. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, their reputation for quality horses spreading throughout West Texas and beyond. They hired help as the business grew, providing good wages and fair treatment, making their ranch a model for how workers should be treated. Henry grew into a bright, adventurous boy who loved the horses almost as much as his parents did. When he was 3, Lila gave birth to a daughter they named Hope, because that's what their family represented: hope born from tragedy, light from darkness. 2 years later, another son arrived, and they named him Samuel, after the man who had helped them get their start. The nightmares never returned. Whatever trauma Lila's mind had been protecting her from, bringing it into the light had robbed it of its power. She still had gaps in her memory, particularly of the years between the fire and Fort Davis, but she found she didn't need those memories. They weren't the important parts of her story. The important parts were happening now, teaching Hope to ride, watching Harrison show Henry how to gentle a nervous colt, Samuel taking his first steps, the ranch hands gathering for Sunday dinners, becoming like family, Martha Henderson visiting to spoil the grandchildren she'd adopted in spirit, if not in blood. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Lila with a trip, just the two of them, leaving the children with Martha. They rode out to the place where the Salazar house had stood, the ruins long since reclaimed by the desert. "Why here?" Lila asked as they dismounted. Harrison pulled something from his saddlebag, a wooden marker he'd carved himself. It read, "Here lived the Salazar family, Miguel, Maria, and their daughter Lucia. They loved this land and each other. They are remembered." Together, they planted the marker at the site. Lila knelt and placed her hand on the sun-warmed earth. "Thank you," she said softly to her parents, to the universe, to the strange path that had led her from tragedy to triumph. "Thank you for giving me life. Thank you for giving me strength. I hope I've made you proud." Harrison helped her to her feet, and they stood together looking out over the land that had witnessed so much pain and so much healing. "Do you ever regret it?" Lila asked. "Taking on a woman with no past, no memory, nothing but problems?" Harrison turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I regret nothing. You gave my life meaning. Before you, I was just drifting, running from my past. You taught me that it's okay to stop, to plant roots, to build something permanent. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Lila corrected, standing on her toes to kiss him. "We built this together." "Origin matters less than now," Harrison said one more time. "And our now is pretty wonderful," Lila agreed, smiling. They rode back to their ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple. In the distance, they could see the house they'd built, the barn, the corrals, with horses grazing peacefully. Smoke rose from the chimney. Their foreman's wife was probably starting dinner for the crew. It was home. It was safety. It was everything they'd fought for, and more than they'd dared dream. That night, after checking on their sleeping children and banking the fire, Lila and Harrison lay together in their bed, comfortable and content in the way only people who have weathered storms together can be. I love you, Lila whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Harrison replied, his arms tightening around her. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. And as Lila drifted off to sleep, she thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. She'd lost everything: her family, her memories, her very identity, and yet she'd found everything that truly mattered. She'd found love and purpose and peace. She'd found herself, not in the fragments of a forgotten past, but in the reality of a well-lived present. The mystery of her origins, once so terrifying and consuming, had become just another chapter in a much longer story. A story that was still being written, day by day, choice by choice, with Harrison by her side and their children as living proof that hope could grow even in the harshest desert. She'd learned the most important truth, that who you are matters more than who you were, that the family you choose can be as strong as the family you're born into, and that love, real, deep, committed love, can heal even the deepest wounds. Origin mattered less than now, and now was everything. Years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Henry, now 12, was already an accomplished rider who could gentle the wildest horse with patience and intuition inherited from both parents. Hope, at 9, had her mother's green eyes and her father's steady temperament, along with a love of reading that kept her constantly begging for books whenever they went to town. Samuel, at 7, was the family comedian, always finding ways to make his siblings laugh and his parents shake their heads in fond exasperation. The ranch had expanded to over 200 acres, and the Vance name was known throughout Texas for producing the finest horses in the region. They employed 6 regular ranch hands and brought on additional help during busy seasons. Harrison had built a reputation not just for quality horses, but for fair dealing and honest business practices, something increasingly rare in the sometimes cutthroat world of ranching and trading. Lila had found her calling not just in helping with the horses, but in creating a home that was a refuge for anyone who needed it. Word had spread through the Mexican community that the Vance Ranch was a place where you could find work without fear of exploitation, where your dignity would be respected, where the woman of the house understood what it meant to have nowhere else to go. Several of their ranch hands were people with complicated pasts of their own, and Lila never pried into histories that people wanted to keep private. She understood better than anyone that the present was what mattered, that people deserved a chance to prove themselves by their actions rather than be judged by their origins. On a warm evening in May 1891, 13 years after Lila had first stumbled into Pecos, the family gathered on their expanded porch for dinner. It had become tradition to eat outside when weather permitted. Everyone squeezed around a long table Harrison had built, with the ranch hands joining them as family. "Papa, tell the story about how you met Mama," Hope said, as she often did. The children never tired of hearing it, and each telling seemed to add new layers of understanding as they grew older. Harrison looked at Lila, a smile playing at his lips. "You tell it this time," he said to her. Lila set down her fork and looked at her children, these beautiful souls who had given her life such meaning. "I was lost," she said simply. "In every way, a person can be lost. I didn't know where I came from or where I was going. I was alone and scared, and I thought I might never find my way." "And then Papa found you," Samuel piped up. "Not exactly," Lila said. "I found myself, but your papa helped me see that it was okay not to have all the answers. He taught me that what matters isn't where you come from, but what you do with where you are." Henry, old enough now to understand the deeper implications, asked, "Do you ever wish you could remember everything? All those years that are gone?" Lila considered the question seriously. Sometimes, she admitted, curiosity is natural, but truthfully, I have everything I need right here. You three, your father, this ranch, our friends. The missing years can't give me anything more valuable than what I already have. Origin matters less than now, Henry said, having heard the phrase enough times to have memorized it. Exactly, Harrison said, reaching across the table to take Lila's hand. Your mother taught me that as much as I taught her. We all have pasts. Some we remember and some we don't. But we all have the same present moment, and that's where life actually happens. As the evening deepened and the stars began to emerge, the children drifted off to play, their laughter echoing across the ranch. The ranch hands gradually headed to the bunkhouse, leaving Lila and Harrison alone on the porch, sitting in the comfortable silence of two people who no longer needed words to communicate. Are you happy? Harrison asked, the same question he'd asked 13 years ago on their first night in this house. Happier than I ever imagined possible, Lila said. You? More than I can say, Harrison replied. A coyote called in the distance, and horses nickered softly in the barn. The night air was sweet with the scent of the wildflowers Lila had planted around the house, and somewhere inside, Hope was playing a simple tune on the piano Harrison had bought her for her last birthday. This was life. Real, solid, tangible life. Built from nothing but determination and love, from ashes and mystery, from two wounded people who had found each other when they needed it most. Lila leaned her head on Harrison's shoulder, watching Henry teach Samuel something about tracking in the dirt yard, Hope now joining them with her book abandoned. Their children, their legacy. Proof that the future could be bright, even when the past was dark. Thank you, she whispered. For what? Harrison asked. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For believing in me when I had nothing to offer but questions. For building this life with me. Harrison kissed the top of her head. You had plenty to offer. You just couldn't see it yet. You had courage and strength and a heart that refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. That's what I saw. That's what I fell in love with. I love you, Lila said, more with every passing year. And I love you, Harrison replied. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. Just like I promised. They sat together as the night deepened, watching their children play, listening to the sounds of their ranch settling in for evening. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built, everything they'd dreamed of, it was all real, all theirs, all worth every struggle. Lila thought about the girl she'd been, stumbling into Pecos with blood on her dress and terror in her heart. That girl had been so lost, so broken, so certain she would never find solid ground again. If she could speak to that girl now, she would tell her that the darkness wouldn't last forever, that help was coming in the form of a serious-eyed cowboy with a gentle heart, that love and home and family were waiting just around the corner. But maybe that girl had known on some level. Maybe that's why she'd kept walking, kept fighting, kept refusing to give up even when she had no reason to hope. Maybe survival itself is a form of faith, a belief that somewhere, somehow, things will get better. And they had gotten better. They'd gotten so much better than she could have imagined. The mystery of her origins, once so consuming, had become just a small part of a much larger tapestry. Yes, she was Lucia Salazar, daughter of Miguel and Maria, survivor of fire and trauma. But she was also Lila Vance, wife of Harrison, mother of Henry and Hope and Samuel, rancher, friend, pillar of her community. She was all of those things and more, and the sum total of her life wasn't defined by what she couldn't remember, but by what she'd chosen to build from the ashes of the past. Origin mattered less than now, and now was beautiful. As the stars wheeled overhead and the children finally came in for bed, as Harrison locked up the barn and Lila banked the fire for the night, as they climbed into their bed and held each other close, Lila felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. She'd solved the mystery enough to find peace. She knew she'd survived tragedy. She knew she'd defended herself against evil. She knew she'd been strong enough to keep going, even when her mind had tried to protect her by forgetting. But more importantly, she knew she'd built something beautiful from the ruins. She knew she was loved and needed and valued. She knew that her children would grow up secure in the knowledge of who they were and where they came from, that they would never have to question their place in the world the way she had. That was her true legacy, not the tragic origins, but the triumphant present, not the mystery of what had been lost, but the certainty of what had been found. She fell asleep in her husband's arms, in the house they'd built together, on the land they'd claimed as their own, surrounded by the family they'd created. The past was at peace, the present was full of love, and the future stretched ahead, bright with promise. Origin mattered less than now. And now, Lila Vance was finally, completely, gloriously home.